If you haven't been with us for a while, we started a series on January 2nd called Inshmuative. It was really our culture's way of saying that we think there's some stuff out there that's really life-giving if you know it, and oftentimes it's so simple that we assume that if you have a brain, and in Christian context, if you have a brain and a Bible, you can figure it out. But in fact, if we'll humble ourselves just a little bit, what we'll step back and see is that we didn't come out of the womb knowing that, nor did we get start a relationship with Jesus and instantly know that. It was that we learned that, typically from key people. So we've been talking so far we've done 3 things. We'll go 2 more this week and next. Kind of these loosely connected ideas that are life-giving and important and counterintuitive, though we often treat them as the exact opposite. Speaking of counterintuitive, my friend Kyle sent me this email this week because he does a lot of online business stuff. And what we have here for you is a picture of, that is an at-home gastric bypass surgery kit that up until about a week ago you could buy on Amazon for $275. So should you decide that you needed gastric bypass surgery but $30,000 is a little steep for you, the alternative would be to go online to Amazon and buy for yourself this kit for $275 with all kinds of paraphernalia, not to do drugs, but to put a rubber band around your stomach in your living room. There's even reviews. Just so you know, I still can't tell whether or not it's a spoof. I've been trying to figure that out, but there was a real article in a Seattle newspaper, and you can't buy it on Amazon anymore, though. It's been removed from the site. But there were reviews on Amazon's site. If you're familiar with Amazon, you know how people leave reviews. Here are some of the reviews. This one came from Doris, who lived in New York City Metro. She says, as a busy professional, I find very little patience for silly things like scheduling doctor consultations, and furthermore, absolutely refuse to sacrifice my valuable time for surgeries and post-op care. Frankly, I feel that the whole industry is highly overrated. So imagine my delight when finally there is a responsible company who's willing to give me the opportunity to handle matters in my own way and on my own schedule. This is a fantastic product that delivers on its promise. My only complaint is that it should probably include industrial-sized plastic wraps, as bodily fluids create a mess on your living room carpet. But other than that, a wonderful set. Highly recommend. Another person wrote in, I waited all of 2010 for this item to finally go on sale. Excellent product. However, the instructions included were from an IKEA chest of drawers. No matter. If you've ever put together those drawers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. No matter. This kit was easy to figure out. I mean, how hard is it to put a rubber band around your stomach? With only 3 leftover pieces and a lost pint of blood, I'm ready to hit the buffet. Last one came from a guy named Mitch. See what I'm saying? What the heck? He says, I thought the instructions were fine. I don't know what everyone else was complaining about. I do pass out every time I take a dump, and I think I left a few of the parts inside of me. But that always happens with DIY products. I was supposed to say bathroom, and I read that literally. Sorry about that. You don't have to send me the email. I just ordered the Little Johnny spleen and appendix removal kit and look forward to giving it a shot. That's kind of what we mean, intuitive, inshmuative. There are some things that we all would think would be intuitive, but upon further review, they are not. And so in the first week, we talked about strengths, and our friend Jessica was here, and she just explored this idea that God made us with strengths and weaknesses, and our spouses know this, but we often don't, and God gives us permission to lean into our strengths. In fact, part of what she articulated was God's people need you to play to your strengths, because that's the way he's created people, is with strengths and weaknesses. The second week, we talked about discipleship. And really, we confess that around here, we acknowledge that there's not a system that we can all plug ourselves into and predictably, come out the other side a disciple. That what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa, in terms of how do we go about growing in our relationship with God. And yet we acknowledge that in confessing that we don't think there's a system, the danger is that we'll all say it's intuitive. Give somebody a brain and a Bible, and they can figure out how to follow Jesus. And in fact, what I suggested that week is, that's not been any of our experiences. That if you've done more than get saved, so to speak, there's been a person or people in your life who you've both taught and who have taught you, and that seems to be the common denominator. Last week, we titled 800 Big Hair, because we talked about money and how uncomfortable it is to talk about money, how counterintuitive it is to talk about money, and yet we suggested that God is a God who asks us to. And if you're part of the Narrate culture in any way, and you weren't here last week, I'd really recommend downloading that podcast or grabbing that CD on the table downstairs. Because we also talked a lot about like Narrate and money, and like it's the thing that we all like, when are we going to talk about money? I can't wait for that weekend. We did that. So you missed out, which is sad for you. But seriously, you should grab that CD, because it was kind of like a mini Vision weekend, just in terms of we talked shop quite a bit as well. This week I want to talk about community. I want to talk about relationships. I want to talk about friendships. I want to talk about that part of all of us that, like, we all know we need them. That part of us that, it just seems like we do hit the womb knowing that we need, or hit the womb, come out of the womb, knowing that we need relationships with other people. Like, I want to talk about, even in Scripture, like before there's sin, God says something's not good. Like before the fall, like you've heard, right? Like Adam and Eve and the fruit, and she ate the fruit, and it's all been downhill ever since. Like before that happened, God said something's not good. And it was the fact that people didn't have relationship with others, that Adam was alone. I just want to talk about that part of all of us that knows we need relationship. And yet, knowing that we need relationships doesn't make it any less painful or any easier, does it? Because, like, when we graduate high school, or when we, like, officially finish up our formal education, whether that's, like, we graduate college or whatever, we quickly realize that for the first 20 or so years of our life, we were surrounded by hundreds, maybe thousands of people, like, in school, who were prospective friends, right? And it means that their schedules looked real similar to ours, their interests were real similar to ours, their place in life was real similar to ours, and thus it was kind of relatively easy to find relationship with people because we were surrounded by opportunity. And then we get out and we get a job and we get a family, and we realize that it's exponentially more difficult because we don't like the 4 people we work with. Or the 4 people we work with are like 3 decades younger than us. Or we have kids, none of our friends do. Or we don't have kids, and all of our friends do. Or I'm single, and all my friends are married. Like, relationships are one of those things, like, we all know that we need them, and yet it can be extremely difficult to fulfill that. Because we're walking along relationally with somebody on a path, and we're having a hoot with our relationship portfolio, if you will, and then people start peeling off to the left and the right, going in different directions than us. It doesn't just happen to an 8th grader who watches his friends turn to drugs and doesn't want to do that. It happens to adults. And then there's people who hurt us, and we would have never thought that they would have thrown us under the bus. There's people that we overheard that they said this, and we would have never thought that they would have abandoned us. Which doesn't just mean we lose that relationship, but it makes us that much more reluctant to engage in the next relationship. Because though we know we need relationships, it might be easier to just not be that vulnerable. We move to a new town, perhaps. And by the nature of being 20-something or 30-something or 40-something or 50-something or whatever in a new town, the reality is you have new relational needs, but the people around you don't. And especially in a town like this, they already have their friends. They already have their circles. So talking about relationships is something we've done in the past, for sure. And I guess this morning what I kind of want to do is just contribute to this culture that I feel like we've been really intentional about just adding to every a couple times a year. Because relationships, they're central and they're painful. Like we need them, and yet we know that in engaging in them, we're going to get hurt. It's this ugly, messy thing. So by way of review, I kind of want to, let's see, on Easter, we started this series called Reducible Complexity, or Church, What's the Point? We were in a little competition, like who can come up with the longest title for a sermon series, and we won that one. We wanted to talk about church, like what's the point of church, what's the purpose of church, okay, I have my relationship with Jesus, but beyond that, what's the value of being a part of a community of people? And in that series, we very intentionally addressed community a couple times. First, we talked about this thing called communitas. We explored the idea that relationships are best formed not when you go looking for relationships, but when you go looking for mission. That the best friendships, the best relationships, they don't happen when people say, let's be friends. They happen when they say, let's engage on this journey. Let's be a part of this adventure. Let's take on this risk. Let's climb this mountain. Let's join this team. Think Finding Nemo. A bunch of sea creatures with really no reason to have relationship are united by a cause, Finding Nemo. I know this is ridiculously juvenile, but it's a perfect illustration. And in the process of finding Nemo, these people who wouldn't, if they were going relationship shopping, have necessarily found each other, end up in these very deep, authentic relationships. Why? Because of mission. And so one of the things, just if you're new to the culture around here, or just by way of reminder, one of the things that's like a cornerstone in our belief about relationships is that we're going to invite one another to be on mission together, believing wholeheartedly that the best relationships are formed in the context of serving together. Now, that doesn't mean like you have to serve on kids' team on Sunday. That doesn't mean you have to be a part of a scattering opportunity. But just generally speaking, what we're saying is the best relationships are formed not when we say like, hey, will you be my friend, like kindergarten, but when you say like, hey, I'm going to do something. I'm going to give of myself, and I'm going to look over my shoulder every once in a while and see if there are people that I can go deeper in relationship with. Communitas. The other thing we talked about is this research that a sociologist did. It was eventually published in a book called In Search to Belong, written by a guy named Joseph Myers. This is going to feel like college, but give me like 3 minutes. He talks about in this research, because this stuff blew my mind, so much so that I'm like willing to repeat it, even though it was less than a year ago, that there's 4 types of relationships we need. That oftentimes we say like I'm empty, and what we assume is I'm lacking personal friends. He says that to be relationally fulfilled, there's 4 types of relationships. We need intimate relationships. These are the relationships, we don't have very many. Sometimes we go through phases of life where we don't have any of these. These people know everything about us and continue to journey with us. Then there's personal relationships. These are where most of our very best friends, oftentimes even spouses, fall. Like these are the people who they know almost everything about us. Like they get access to the archives of who we are. Not all of it, most of it. And then there's, what's the other one? Oh yeah, personal. Oh, intimate, personal, social. Yes. No. Yeah, social. Sorry. Social relationship. These are people who are their friends. Like you go backpacking with them once a year. You have them over for dinner a couple times a year. You might play cards once every couple months. These are good friends. And there's no shame in this, but this is people, they don't know you that well. Mostly what they know about you is that you're amazing and wonderful and have no flaws. Like these are those friendships. And then there's public relationships. That's the relationships you have with people in this room. I mean, these are the relations. This is why we desire to be part of a worship service where the room is full, right? It's why we find so much satisfaction in going to a public sporting event or a public concert. They're relationships where what we have relationship with are people, but it's because of an experience. And we don't have to know their name. We don't have to have a conversation. We just want to experience things with them. And it gets more intense because what this guy argues is that they come in proportions. That for every 1 intimate relationship, we need 2 personal relationships, and 4 social relationships, and 8 public relationships. The cornerstone there in the culture of community around here is this then, that the gospel doesn't compel us to pretend like we're all best friends. That the gospel doesn't compel us to say like if we're going to know somebody, we have to become best friends because Jesus loves us and that's what we would do. That's what loving your neighbor means. It's permission to go, wow, I really like them. I don't have any room in my personal relationship space right now, but I really like them. It's permission to, I don't know, some people call it cliques. I don't know what you want to call it, but to just recognize like we can't all be friends on the same level. So that's kind of the foundation that we've set. I guess this morning what I want to do is continue to stimulate that, to continue to stimulate our thinking there. And I just want to, there's one observation that I'm going to make from the text that you're going to be annoyed when I make it, because you're going to be like, really? Really? Like, we could have talked about the cross, we could have talked about the atonement, we could have talked about forgiveness of sin. Really? We're going to talk about, like, really? It's a concept that I think is extraordinarily simple, and yet being honest with it and looking at the concept plus our habits, I think proves that it's not intuitive. It's something we have to learn to do. Like maybe you're somebody who your relationship portfolio just is unsatisfying to you. There's this desire in you, and you can't even really put to words. You don't even necessarily know, are they personal, are they social? You don't even really know where you're empty. There's this desire in you for your community to be stronger. I think we could use this thing very simply. Maybe you're somebody who's recently been through divorce. And the fact of the matter is, the hard thing about that is that people choose. Like people, they divorce and they didn't anticipate losing all their friends, but you did. And you're alone. And you didn't anticipate that happening. And now all of a sudden you're like, I don't know how to start over because I'm not looking for dates, but I would like to have some friends. And I think there's some things that you could insert into your habits that would go a long way. Maybe you're new to town. Maybe you have a kid. And now you realize that you have a bunch of friends who many of them don't even have spouses, let alone kids, and now you've got two. And you're going like, I don't understand how do I do this? Maybe you're just bored. Maybe you're someone that recognizes that you have lots of good friends, but there's something in you that just, you come alive when you meet new people. And yet, you only have so much room. Maybe there's someone in your life, maybe you can flip this whole thing. Maybe there's someone in your life who you really admire, you'd really like to learn from, you'd really like some of them to rub off on you, so to speak. But you recognize they're busy, they're full, and you're busy and you're full, and you're not really sure how to make that happen. Perhaps someone, maybe you have a really big kingdom heart. And when you think about relationships and you think about community, you think like I think Jesus would think, and that is you don't just think about Narrate, you don't just think of like having a relationship with a bunch of churchies. Like you think of coworkers, you think of parents of kids who your kids go to school with, you think of parents of kids who you coach their kids on teams, like you think of people out in the community, and you don't think like in terms of so that I can put a tract on their windshield or so that I can cram Jesus down their throat. You think in terms of like, I would just like to know them better and maybe have a chance to like demonstrate that Jesus isn't weird. I mean, maybe we'll have a chance to have a conversation about him, maybe we won't. Maybe you just got this kingdom heart that your desire isn't for a bunch of Christian friends. Or maybe you're just busy. Like who's not busy, right? And the tension is, I think, on this community issue, we all know we benefit from relationships. We all know that that's central to how God made us. And yet, like when's the last time you sat on your couch and went like, I don't know what I'm going to do for the next 4 hours? Like who does that, right? Nobody. Because even when we're not busy, we think we're busy. So I want to jump into this one little thing. Let me just start with this question. Have you ever noticed how central food is to the text? Like how much of the activity in the Bible, whether you're talking about Abraham or Noah or Jesus or Paul or the early church, ever just taken the time to notice like how central food is to the activity in the text, to God's doing things in the text? Now maybe you're going like, no, I haven't met him because I've never read the Bible and you've just excluded me. Well, let's just think of it this way. Like, ever considered how central food is to your life? Like we make jokes, right? Like that we can't even gather without donuts. That's kind of a way that church people make fun of church people. Like church people don't know how to gather without donuts. Anyway, but just like think of your own family tradition, think of your own rhythms, think of your own life. Like how awkward would it be to do Christmas Eve without food? And then you kind of step back, and I could probably move on from this rather quickly because, anyway. And what was it like before there was TV? Because I can have people over at my house now, and we'll just sit around and watch the football game, and lament the Broncos season and hope for the future and all things like that. But what was it like before TV? And I guess what I'm suggesting is what if food is kind of a spiritual thing? Like what if the meal has some sacred elements to it? What I want to do is, just to kind of feed that thought, I want to look at a few places just in the life of Jesus, starting in Matthew 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. Says to a guy, "Follow me, be my disciple." Watch verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, in this culture, to accept a dinner invitation was to accept deeper friendship. To accept a dinner invitation was to say, yeah, I would like to know you better, which is why so many times in the Gospels you're reading about Jesus and it says and then they had dinner and then everybody wanted to kill him. Is why. Because to have dinner with these people was an acknowledgement of their value, their humanity. And it got him in some trouble. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Translation, I desire scattering, not church. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. One of the most remarkable, one of the most profound metaphors in Jesus' teaching about his mission, that I'm there for people who are broken, not for people who have it all together. Where did it come? Over a meal. In Luke 7, It says, now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. Interesting. So he accepted the invitation of sinners to go deeper in relationship. He also did the self-righteous. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. She's a prostitute, probably been divorced by her husband, her only livelihood, prostitution. She has a bottle that's probably about this big, made out of granite, with maybe a year's salary worth of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Now the other context going on here is in this culture when there was like a dignitary thing going on, when like key Bible teachers were having conversations, the community, because the communities were smaller, were invited to stand around the periphery and just observe the conversations. So the table would have been in the middle, they'd have been on their elbow, their head would be by the table, their feet would be out here, people standing around the edges just taking in the dialogue. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner. Jesus said, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he canceled the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You've judged correctly. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, talk about getting called on the carpet, right? Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you that her many sins have been forgiven. He's not soft on the issue, for she loved much. But whoever has forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sin? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Jesus uses the dinner table as an illustration of salvation over the context of dinner. One of the more famous instances in the text, there's these 2 sisters who fight. I've heard they do that. And they're arguing with Jesus. They have this interaction. Actually, Jesus actually confirms one of them and says, like, you're an all-star. And the other one, he says, like, yeah, you failed. Because one of them sat at his feet and listened, and the other was busy. The context happened where? Luke 10:38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Now there's a whole other strand that we could take on this topic. Did you know that, hospitality is actually a command in the text? In Romans, chapter 12, Paul says this. It's just this, shotgun blast of, do, and descriptions of love. Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in brotherly love, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving. Can't you just see, his face getting redder and redder? Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Later, Paul is talking to 2 young church leaders, Timothy and Titus. He'd planted these churches and left these guys behind to lead them, to both of them, as he's trying to help them embrace and understand, okay, who can help me lead? Who's healthy enough to lead? In both of his descriptions to them, their willingness to have people over for dinner was part of what affirmed or not their spiritual health. There's this total other direction, and it might involve shame, and so I'm not going to go there, but it's this high value in the early church. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. And then in verse 7, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. The examples go on. In John 12, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. One more, because I know you're annoyed. Afterward, Jesus appeared again. Did I read your minds? Because you're all laughing. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Context here, sorry. This is post-Jesus resurrection. Peter failed Jesus. He betrayed Jesus before his death. He assumes that he's out, that the game's over, and that worst case scenario, he's disqualified. So he's going back to his trade. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the other side of the boat and you'll find some." Don't know why this didn't cue them off, but it didn't. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it, and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Question. Why did he restore him over breakfast? Why not at his office? Why not over a table? An office desk, Why over breakfast? Was it because he knew that there was going to be this awkward moment where he was going to say, "Peter, what happened?" And if there was food there, Peter could cram bread in his mouth and would have 6 seconds to buy time to give his answer. Right? Did he know that Peter was a little bit awkward socially, kind of like me, and that it would that it would be better if they could hide behind food? And did he know that Peter struggled with eye contact a little bit, and somehow that's less obvious if there's a meal between you and them? Is a meal just a meal, or is it kind of sacred in the economy of the text? Does a meal and having a meal, is it on par with sitting in 2 chairs in an office? Or are they entirely different contexts? I was actually reading this book a couple years ago by a guy named Matt Smay, who wrote a book called The Tangible Kingdom, and it was really influential on us, and I remembered him talking about this, and so this week I went back to the book and I found the place, and he says in there, you would be shocked if you knew the percentage of the Gospels that happened over a meal. So I was like, I'd love to know the percentage. So I found him on Facebook, this is the world we live in, right? And I asked him, dude, what's the percentage? Come on. Because then he says, you should study that. It'll be a fun study for you, right? Which is preacher talk for, I think it's a high percentage, but I haven't actually done the research. So I Facebook him. Dude, what's the percentage? And I kind of, I tell him, we're a church, I'm going to do this message, I'd love to have the data. He Facebooks me back, "I can't find it anywhere. Don't know what I did with it." I'm going, "I know exactly what you did with it, dude. You never had it." Nonetheless, they tell me it's high. And it's not just the Gospels. In the Old Testament, the Jews, their whole religious experience centered around a temple. And I know we look on it with, it was gross, but it was central to their experience of knowing and following God. And when the first generation of people found their generation, or the first temple destroyed, and they were in a foreign land, they found themselves saying, "Now what? How in the world do we worship God without the temple?" And I think even bigger must have been, and how do we introduce him to our kids? Kind of like maybe the text and church would play in our lives. The rabbis invented synagogue, and that's where it came from. Let's gather, let's sing song, let's tell story, let's study scripture. That'll replace the temple. And then the rabbis went, but wait a minute, what about the altar? This place where we sacrifice animals. What about that? The most sacred part of our entire religious experience, this symbolic of our need for forgiveness and our brokenness in God's holiness. How do we replace that? The rabbis, they concluded, well, the next most sacred thing in your life is your dinner table. And in the Jewish culture, it's the dinner table, even to this day, in many Orthodox homes, that has replaced the altar, because they can't just go find a rock and sacrifice a lamb, and they don't have a temple, and the next most sacred thing in their life involves eating meals with one another. I guess what I'm suggesting that is a little counterintuitive is the art of sharing meals together. I think we could even go a little further and say, it's a lost art. For those of you that are dissatisfied with that portfolio of relationships, I guess what I'm wondering is, rather than waiting for me or some organization like me or some other person to help you with that, what would happen if you just started having people over for dinner? Maybe you've been through divorce recently. Maybe you're new to town. Maybe you're just bored relationally. What would just happen if you went like, I'm just going to have some people over for dinner? Maybe you've got this kingdom heart. There's this desire to reach people, or at least to make Jesus available to people should they show an interest. Well, what if you had that family over for dinner? Maybe you're just busy and you're caught on the tension of, I need better relationships. I need some Christ following. I don't know where you're at with that, with relationships, and yet I'm busy. This is the best thing about this whole deal. Because there's one thing that you do every day, and so does everybody else, at least in our context. It's eating. I remember when I started an internship when I was 20 years old at a high school ministry, and I was told that my job was what they called contact work, just hang out with freshmen in high school. That was my whole job, 20 hours a week. I was supposed to just spend time with high school students. I looked at Vern, my boss, and I said, like, how do I do that? And he said, well, Adam, there's something really easy to do, because every one of those students eats every day. Take them to lunch, take them to dinner. And this is what we did, and it was brilliant and a blast. Like, you're busy for relationships. You don't have any more, or you're busy and you don't have time for more relationships, but you eat. I guess I'm just suggesting that maybe you collaborate on that a little bit. Like, I understand the reasons for not doing that. We all have them, right? Like, my house is too small, or I don't have a house, I have an apartment. Or maybe you're like, my house is too big and I don't know that I could do that. My house is dirty. Whose house here isn't dirty? You don't have to raise your hand. Right? And you're going, well, no, I've got these friends and their house is immaculate. No, it's not. It's clean when you get over there. It's not clean, right? There's a big difference. There's no dishes on the counter when people come over, but there's dishes sitting there right now because no one's coming over today, right? I'm not a very good cook. I'm picky. They're picky. They have kids. I don't have kids. They're obnoxious. Their kids are obnoxious. My kids are obnoxious. I mean, there's about a million reasons, and we all have those reasons. I guess what I'm saying is we can stand behind them and let them just kind of shut us down, because I'm embarrassed for people to see that, like, my living room walls have a bunch of chips in it. I'm embarrassed for people to see that, like, my house is small. I'm afraid that my kids are going to do something embarrassing and they're like going to punch the wife or something like that. Yeah. It all might happen. Probably will. I guess I'm just wondering, what would happen like in your own life, in your own relationships, if you just refound this lost art of having people over for dinner? And what would happen to a church, to a community like Narrate? Not that we were all trying to be buddy-buddy, and not that it was all about church people hanging out with church people. What would happen, though, to the, like, networking? If we were just having more meals together. We talk every week about our desire to tell God's story, believing wholeheartedly that we don't have any new information to contribute. We just have to tell the story better by the way we live. How much differently might the people you work with think about Jesus if they came over to your house and they realized that you don't pray for 10 minutes before every meal? Or even at all, maybe. That there's not like chicken blood all over your dining room because of your religious beliefs. Like how far might that go in just telling God's story better? Here's my challenge to you. What if you found 2 days in February and you just said, I don't know who yet, we don't know who yet, but we're going to have somebody's feet under our dinner table in these 2 Fridays in February, these 2 Wednesdays in February, whatever you pick. Because here's the deal. Like we had some friends over for dinner this last Tuesday. We didn't call them Monday and say, let's have dinner. I think this is one of the areas where we miss this, is if we're not willing to plan ahead, then it never happens. Because the fact of the matter is, next Wednesday night, you're going to be exhausted. You're not going to call somebody Wednesday night and ask them to come over for dinner on Thursday. But if you committed to Thursday like a month ago, you'll see it through, and you'll have a blast. Many of the dinners, we'll have dinner this week. I'm not trying to brag because we're like twice a month, so I'm not trying to use myself as... Anyway, we'll have some people over for dinner on, I think it's Wednesday night this week. That literally we've been scheduling it since early November. because it's canceled a couple times, and right, like you know how it goes. And it's like, okay, so now in December our date got canceled, so in December let's talk about dates in January and February. And here we are at the end of January, and we found one. So my challenge is, what would happen if you just found 2 days? 2 days in February where you said, we're going to have somebody over for dinner. We're going to do that. And you don't procrastinate, but you plan. Or maybe it's a specific person, and you just go like, we're going to have this people over for dinner, and I'm just going to ask them, I'm going to send them an email, I'm going to send them a text going, like, what does April look like for you? I don't know. I do know that I feel like God is asking us to create a community that definitely affirms the need for relationships, and yet also affirms that the most functional way to help you with that isn't to say, like, give us your name and we'll give you 5 best friends in 2 months or your money back. That it's this thing that you have to work out and invest in yourself and experiment with and have people over for dinner and go, that was fun. I think I'll do that again in 2020 with them. And that's okay, because the relational spaces. What happened in your life, in our lives, in our community? And finally, there's this. God uses the dinner table to illustrate heaven and to illustrate salvation. And if you're someone here and you're going like, I don't give a rip about relationships and having people over for dinner, like this feels like a workshop, I guess what I'm hoping you take from this is like, that's the gospel. Like God is a God, and he uses this illustration in the text of going, join me, join me. Everybody's welcome at my table. My grace is sufficient for you to join me for dinner. Let me pray. God, Lord, relationships are such a messy thing and such a difficult thing, and we're so darn busy. To talk about, like, the art of having people over for dinner is easy to talk about, but it is 2 more things on our schedule. God, I'm thinking for people who have these like strong pastoral, strong discipleship, strong outreach hearts, and there's this desire in them to see friends come to know you and to see friends' marriages get better. I guess I'm hoping that you would like peel back the pages of the text a little bit and help them see that the meal is a sacred event and a remarkable opportunity to invest in the lives of others and make you available to others. For people who are feeling a little on the edges relationally and they feel like they would love to connect a little bit better with some more people, God, I pray that you would help them take a more active role in that. That rather than anticipate someone like myself or organizations like this solving that for them, that they would take that up on their own. Take the risk of being rejected, take the risk of their house being messy, take the risk of the food not being very good. God, it's remarkable to think that you are holy, that you are completely other, and yet your dinner table is something you invite all of us to. It's in Jesus' name we pray.